If two developers can fork Bitcoin and succeed in redefining what Bitcoin is, then I will have no choice but to declare Bitcoin a failed project.
Now, this is a quote from an email sent by Satoshi Nakamoto at a time when institutional investors were trying to take control of Bitcoin with the help of certain developers, Bitcoin miners, and crypto companies. Thankfully, their attempts failed, but recent moves by asset managers like BlackRock, megabanks like JP Morgan, and financial regulators like the Financial Action Task Force suggest that they're about to try again. So today, we're going to tell you the story of how institutional investors tried to take control of Bitcoin, how the Bitcoin community won, what institutional investors are doing now, and how we can fight back. I'll start by saying that almost all the information in today's video comes from a brilliant book titled, quote, The Block Size War, The Battle for Control Over Bitcoin's Protocol Rules. It was written by Jonathan Beer, the head of research at BitMEX, and I strongly suggest giving it a read if you have the time. The link will be in the description. Note that I'm leaving a lot of the details out for the sake of time. Now, I want to set the stage with an incredible quote from the start of the second chapter of the book. It's a bit lengthy, but it's required to put everything I'm about to say into context. It'll also help you understand and appreciate just how far Bitcoin has come. Quote, in the early days of Bitcoin, from 2009 to 2011, the entire ecosystem consisted of just one piece of software, the Bitcoin client. This software existed initially for Microsoft Windows and comprised of the wallet, full node, and miner. There were no mobile applications, no merchants, no gambling websites, no darknet markets, no exchange-traded products, no exchanges, no institutional investors. Just one primitive and basic software application. All one could do was mine some coins, send them, and receive them. At the time, Bitcoin was pretty useless, and on the surface, the system did not appear to have much value or potential. To be interested in the space, one had to have imagination. One had to see many steps ahead and conceptualize how the system would develop and change over time. End quote. Obviously, there were many different opinions about how Bitcoin ought to evolve, but they generally fell into one of two camps. Those who believed that Bitcoin's primary purpose was to be a new payment system, and those who believed that Bitcoin's primary purpose was to be a new monetary system. Those who believed that Bitcoin's primary purpose was to be a new payment system envisioned a world where BTC would become a currency like the US dollar, and Bitcoin would become the base layer for all global payments. This would require making many changes to Bitcoin, namely making it faster. Now, those who believed that Bitcoin's primary purpose was to be a new monetary system envisioned a world where BTC would become money like gold, and Bitcoin would become the base layer for high-value settlements. This would not require making many changes to Bitcoin. It could stay almost the same. You could sum up these differences in perspective as BTC being digital cash versus BTC being digital gold. Of course, most institutional investors initially believed that Bitcoin's primary purpose was to be a new payment system, whereas most Bitcoin users believed that Bitcoin's primary purpose was to become a new monetary system. This resulted in two camps, so-called big blockers and so-called small blockers. If you watched our video about the fastest cryptos, you'll know that one of the ways that you can make cryptos faster is by increasing the size of each block on the blockchain. Again, this is what institutional investors, aka big blockers, wanted for Bitcoin. It was necessary if it was to become a payment system. However, from the viewpoint of the Bitcoin users, aka small blockers, increasing Bitcoin's block size could make it impossible for Bitcoin to fulfill its primary purpose of becoming a new monetary system. This was for many reasons, but primarily because it could set a precedent for changing BTC's total supply of 21 million. Another reason why small blockers were against a block size increase was because it could reduce Bitcoin's decentralization over time. That's because fewer and fewer nodes would be able to store Bitcoin's full transaction history if its blockchain grew too quickly. This is something that we've seen with other cryptos. Logically, if BTC's supply was subject to change and the Bitcoin blockchain itself was centralized, it wouldn't make for a very good store of value. It would be analogous to the supply of gold being subject to change and only a handful of institutions being able to verify what's real gold and what's fake gold. Not only that, but many small blockers believed that Bitcoin could still support a new payment system on its blockchain. They just believed that this purpose was secondary to creating a new monetary system, which ultimately means taking away the ability of central banks and governments to control money. A much bigger endgame, no doubt. Jonathan, the aforementioned author of the book, summed up the difference between the big blockers and small blockers as follows. Quote, "Large blockers prioritized the short term, while small blockers focused on the long term. Large blockers prioritized user experience, while small blockers favored making the system more resilient. Large blockers prioritized growth, while small blockers were more concerned about sustainability. Large blockers were more pragmatic and focused, while small blockers were more scientific and theoretical." Now, you'd be forgiven for thinking that Satoshi was on the side of the small blockers. The email quoted in the introduction might give that impression. In fact, there are many other emails and blog posts which suggest that Satoshi was open to increasing Bitcoin's block size, at least in its early days. Now, believe it or not, but Bitcoin initially didn't have a maximum block size when it launched in January 2009. It wasn't until September 2010 that a block size limit of 1 megabyte was introduced, a change that had been proposed a few months earlier by Satoshi himself. It's not actually known why he set this block size limit. What is known is that concerns about this limit emerged just 1 month later. Another early Bitcoin developer named Jeff Garzik argued that the 1 megabyte limit needed to be removed if Bitcoin ever wanted to compete with the likes of PayPal in terms of speed. As such, you could say Jeff was the first big blocker. 15 minutes later, Jeff received a reply from Michael Markart, one of Bitcoin's earliest advocates and the creator of the first Bitcoin block explorer. Michael warned Jeff that if he tried to increase the block size, it would cause a hard fork. As such, you could say Michael was the first small blocker. Now, for those unfamiliar, a hard fork occurs when a change is made to a blockchain, but not all the nodes on the blockchain agree to the new rules. What results is a chain split, with one blockchain following the old rules, the other blockchain following the new rules, and both blockchains being less secure as a result. On that note, a hard fork because of a block size increase was another reason why small blockers were opposed to it. That's because it would make Bitcoin less secure. Satoshi agreed with Michael for this reason, and the 1 megabyte limit wasn't raised. The block size debate was essentially settled until August 2015. Now, August 2015 is when Mike Hearn and Gavin Andresen announced their support for a proposal for a new version of Bitcoin called Bitcoin XT. The proposal had initially been published by Gavin in July 2015 to the Bitcoin GitHub as Bitcoin Improvement Proposal 101 or BIP 101. Look it up if you have time. As you might have guessed, Bitcoin XT would increase Bitcoin's block size from 1 megabyte to 8 megabytes and then double its block size every year until 2036. By that point, each Bitcoin block would be a whopping 8 gigabytes large, effectively ensuring that only a handful of nodes would be able to store Bitcoin's full history. Naturally, the big blockers argued that aggressively increasing Bitcoin's block size was necessary if it was to become a global payment system. They also argued that there wouldn't be a hard fork because most people in the Bitcoin community, including most nodes, supported increasing Bitcoin's block size. Naturally, the small blockers were not on board with this whatsoever, hence the subheading from The Guardian in an article on the following Monday, quote, The Bitcoin wars have begun. Now, this is where it's extremely important to put things into perspective. For starters, Mike and Gavin were two very influential Bitcoin developers. Mike was a Google engineer who worked on Bitcoin in his spare time and managed to create Bitcoin code that made it possible to create the first mobile crypto wallets. Gavin was especially influential. He was one of Bitcoin's earliest developers and is famous for creating the Bitcoin Faucet, a website that would give you 5 BTC for free just for completing a CAPTCHA. Gavin is also famous for co-founding the Bitcoin Foundation in 2012. He left the foundation in 2017. Speaking of which, if you watched our video about the company taking over crypto, you'll know that USDC issuer Circle was actually the first gold member of the Bitcoin Foundation. You'll also know that before USDC, Circle was focused on BTC payments and wanted Bitcoin to become a payment system. It should come as no surprise then that Circle supported Bitcoin XT after it was published, along with BitPay, the largest crypto payment processor at the time, Blockchain.info, the largest crypto wallet company at the time, and crypto custodians BitGo and Xapo, which was acquired by Coinbase in 2019. What might come as a surprise is that some Bitcoin miners also threw their support behind Bitcoin XT, but not for the reasons you might think. We'll come back to miners in just a moment. Now, you could say that these were the soldiers on the big blocker side. The soldiers on the small blocker side were revealed in the following months during Bitcoin scaling conferences in Montreal and Hong Kong, both of which Jonathan attended. Note that Jonathan attended many of these key events in the block size wars. The key players on the small blocker side were Gregory Maxwell and Adam Back, co-founders of Blockstream, a tech company that creates Bitcoin products. Gregory is famous for being one of the best Bitcoin developers, whereas Adam is famous for being credited in the Bitcoin white paper. Another key player on the small blocker side, meanwhile, was Samson Mow, who was working for a crypto exchange called BTCC at the time and subsequently became the chief security officer of Blockstream. Samson left Blockstream in March last year to focus on helping countries adopt BTC as legal tender. As a fun fact, Blockstream seems to have played a key role in El Salvador's Bitcoin adoption. There's lots of circumstantial evidence for this, the most significant being that the Salvadoran government announced it would be issuing its Bitcoin Volcano bonds on Blockstream's Layer 2 for Bitcoin, the Liquid network. As another fun fact, Jonathan notes in the book that one of Blockstream's earliest investors was French insurance giant AXA Group, whose former CEO, Henri de Castries, was the head of the Bilderberg meetings at the time that AXA invested in Blockstream. Some food for thought, to say the least.
Sorry to interrupt you folks, but I have to let you know about the Coin Bureau deals page. Now, my team and I have been able to pull together some of the best promos and discounts in the crypto space. We're talking trading fee discounts of over 50%, thousands of dollars in bonus airdrops, amazing deals at top exchanges, reduced prices on hardware wallets, and much, much more besides. So just go to coinbureau.com/deals, also linked to below, and find the promo suited to you. Enjoy the rest of the video.
But back to the miners. Now, it seems that Bitcoin miners were initially on the fence about increasing Bitcoin's block size. On the one hand, they believed that a block size increase was reasonable so long as it wasn't too large. On the other hand, they were worried about unwanted side effects, such as a hard fork. Jonathan explains the situation perfectly. Quote, "Most miners seem to agree that they were in control of the network and that it was their decision. However, they believed they did not have enough information available to make the right decision. Kind of like golems without their masters, so to speak." This ties into one of the key questions of the book, and that's who controls Bitcoin. Recall, it's in the title. From the perspective of the big blockers, miners control Bitcoin. So, if there's a Bitcoin fork, then the one with the most mining power is the real Bitcoin. This is what we've been taught to believe in crypto. However, the small blockers see it differently. From their perspective, Bitcoin nodes control Bitcoin. Now, to clarify, miners propose blocks containing BTC transactions, whereas Bitcoin nodes validate these blocks, add them to the Bitcoin blockchain, and store Bitcoin's full transaction history, the full chain of blocks. Once upon a time, all Bitcoin miners were also nodes. This was because the only reason you'd run a Bitcoin node is if you were also mining Bitcoin. Today, the two roles are more distinct, with multiple mining machines using just one node, and many non-miners running nodes just to help secure the blockchain. In any case, whereas big blockers would see the Bitcoin fork with the most mining power as the real Bitcoin, small blockers would see the Bitcoin fork with the most node support as the real Bitcoin, regardless of mining power. And of course, it's the Bitcoin developers who make the node software. This relates to an interesting development during the block size war, and that's segregated witness, or SegWit, which was introduced in 2015. The SegWit upgrade would optimize Bitcoin transactions in a way that would have the practical effect of increasing its block size to 2 megabytes, all without causing a hard fork. As an added bonus, SegWit would make it possible to create Layer 2 scaling solutions for Bitcoin, such as the Lightning Network, which was proposed that same year. More importantly, Layer 2s would make it possible for Bitcoin to become a payments network without compromising its monetary mission. More about the Lightning Network in the description. I digress. On paper, SegWit was the perfect compromise between what the big blockers and small blockers wanted, and meant that miners wouldn't have to worry. In practice, however, the big blockers were not satisfied. According to Jonathan, this was because, quote, this war was about control, and they wanted control. In other words, the institutional investors didn't actually care about scaling Bitcoin. They just wanted an excuse to control it. What's strange is that the Bitcoin miners seemed to join forces with the big blockers after SegWit was proposed. It was later revealed that the Bitcoin miners didn't care about scaling Bitcoin either. It turns out that SegWit would simultaneously patch an extremely lucrative Bitcoin mining exploit. This exploit was called ASIC Boost, and it made it possible to mine BTC for 20% cheaper. What's crazy is that Bitmain, the largest maker of Bitcoin mining machines, had patented ASIC Boost in China. This advantage would have eventually given them a monopoly over Bitcoin mining, not just the hardware. In other words, the Bitcoin miners weren't actually on the side of the big blockers. They just wanted to keep making money. Lo and behold, miner sentiment towards SegWit started to change after the DAO hack in 2016. If you watched our video about Ethereum Classic, you'll know that the DAO hack caused Ethereum to fork. This caused huge issues for both cryptocurrency miners and cryptocurrency exchanges. Just before, the big blockers had been trying to push through another Bitcoin upgrade called Bitcoin Classic, which is apparently where Ethereum Classic got its name from. At the time, other crypto companies heavily funded by TradFi, namely Coinbase, had started supporting larger Bitcoin blocks. After the Ethereum hard fork, the big blockers had to come up with yet another Bitcoin upgrade called Bitcoin Unlimited. By that point, it was becoming clear that doing a full Bitcoin upgrade wasn't the way to go. The watershed moment came in March 2017, when big crypto exchanges became small blockers. Bitfinex, Kraken, Bitstamp, BitMEX, and others all made an unprecedented announcement. In short, the Bitcoin fork with the most node support would be the original Bitcoin, regardless of mining power. Not that it was an issue, miners had become more skeptical of a full upgrade because of the Ethereum hard fork. All that was left to do was find a way to convince everyone involved to support the SegWit soft fork, and this is where Litecoin comes into the picture. If you've watched any of our videos about Litecoin, you'll know that it's a de facto testnet for Bitcoin. Many of the Bitcoin upgrades happen on Litecoin first. What you may not know is that Litecoin miners tried to stop the SegWit upgrade on Litecoin. This was simply because the Litecoin miners were tied up with Bitmain and other miners using ASIC Boost. These entities could see that SegWit for Litecoin was a dry run for Bitcoin and didn't want it to succeed. Unfortunately for the Litecoin miners, the entire Litecoin community was on the same page about SegWit, in large part due to founder Charlie Lee, another significant small blocker. The Litecoin community basically forced the miners to implement SegWit, setting a precedent for Bitcoin. This brings us back to that big question, and that's who controls Bitcoin? Is it the miners, or is it the node operators and developers? Litecoin's SegWit upgrades suggested the answer was the latter, and a post by a pseudonymous developer called Shaolin Fry came up with a plan to make it the final answer. The plan was to orchestrate a so-called user-activated soft fork, or UASF. This would involve Bitcoin nodes signaling that they would stop accepting blocks from Bitcoin miners who refused to implement SegWit. In turn, this would force Bitcoin miners to signal that they intended to implement SegWit. To promote this grassroots initiative, Samson Mow created hats with military colours and the letters UASF emblazoned on them. These hats were worn by small blockers at Bitcoin conferences around the world to show their support for the initiative, which was starting to gain traction in the broader Bitcoin community. What's fascinating is that node signaling is how the Bitcoin community voted on upgrades back in Satoshi's time. This made sense because all Bitcoin miners were also nodes, as you'll recall. But, as with the node users, the voting split into two distinct types: voting with nodes and voting with mining power. Today, both forms of signaling are required for Bitcoin upgrades to occur, and the upgrades themselves must be coded by the Bitcoin developers. Back then, this was not well understood, particularly not by the big blockers, who were starting to realize that they needed to take drastic action to stop SegWit. The drastic action they took was the so-called New York Agreement, a meeting of the largest crypto companies organized by Digital Currency Group, itself a massive crypto company. The big blockers' heavy guns were present: Bitmain, Circle, BitGo, and even hardware crypto wallet provider Ledger. The resulting document is believed to have been drafted by Meltem Demirors, formerly DCG, now at CoinShares. The TLDR is that the largest crypto exchanges, wallet providers, and miners, representing 80% of Bitcoin's hash rate, committed to the SegWit UASF, followed by a hard fork for a larger block size. Well, the big blockers got their hard fork, but not the one they wanted. Another group of big blockers did a so-called clean fork of Bitcoin to create Bitcoin Cash. Now, without getting too technical, a clean fork involves forking the blockchain without disrupting the original chain, a sort of copy and paste. Meanwhile, the SegWit part of the New York Agreement had gone live, a clean victory caused by the UASF. As time went on, it became clear that the hard fork part of the New York Agreement was dead in the water, and BitGo CEO Mike Belshie sent out a letter to his institutional peers admitting defeat. The big blockers realized that pushing for another Bitcoin hard fork made no sense, since it probably wouldn't be bigger than Bitcoin Cash. Many of the big blockers had also turned their focus from controlling Bitcoin to controlling Ethereum. That's a topic for another time, and perhaps another book. Regardless, Jonathan sums up the small blocker Bitcoin victory as follows. Quote, "In the true spirit of Bitcoin and its pseudonymous creator Satoshi, the UASF didn't de-merge from an official, closed-door round-table meeting among the big players. Instead, it was released in the open and promoted by a pseudonymous developer, Shaolin Fry. Somehow, one pseudonymous individual, a few grassroots hardcore followers, and a few hats commissioned by Samson Mow had gone head-to-head with a multi-billion-dollar enterprise and won. I remember thinking that something like that could only happen in Bitcoin." Now, this was a bigger victory than you might think, because it also established BTC as digital gold with Bitcoin Layer 2s supporting payment systems. Jonathan concludes the book by saying, quote, "Bitcoin demonstrated that it could be the user-controlled money that it was destined to be, but warns that this may not last forever. Quote, when the primary beneficiaries of the centrally controlled monetary systems finally realize the potential of user-driven money, they may not like it. These future battles may be over censorship resistance rather than scaling and the block size limit. This time, the financial and political establishment are likely to initiate the conflict. This brings us to the present day, with asset managers like BlackRock filing for a spot Bitcoin ETF, megabanks like JP Morgan getting involved in DeFi, and financial regulators corrupted by Wall Street cracking down on offshore exchanges and centralized stablecoins. From our perspective, it appears that institutional investors are trying to take control of the entire crypto market, not just Bitcoin. From their perspective, they appear to believe that if they can control the price action and availability of crypto, then the miners, validators, nodes, and developers don't matter. The way institutional investors try and control crypto will likely vary between coins and tokens. In the case of Bitcoin, there's been speculation that they want to manipulate BTC the same way that they allegedly manipulate the gold market. JP Morgan was recently fined for this, by the way. In the case of Ethereum, it's clear that they see it as the payment network that Bitcoin was supposed to be, and everything we've discussed today suggests that they want to control Ethereum as much as possible. This is theoretically easier to do now that Ethereum is proof of stake. Take a second to consider that these institutional investors literally have trillions of dollars in assets. It would only take a small fraction of that cash pile to buy up the stake required to control every single proof-of-stake cryptocurrency on the market. At that point, they would truly have total control. However, this all fundamentally depends on whether crypto is allowed to trade freely, meaning peer-to-peer or on decentralized exchanges. So long as BTC and ETH can trade freely, even just outside of jurisdictions controlled by the United States, it will be very difficult to do what I just described. That's probably why financial regulators are actively cracking down on the crypto niches I just mentioned a few moments ago. They make it possible for BTC, ETH, and other cryptocurrencies to escape institutional capture. Even if they manage to succeed, we still have non-custodial wallets. But if you've watched any of our videos about the FATF, you'll know that its mission is to eliminate all non-custodial crypto activities by labeling them as high risk. One of the FATF's first moves is to force all crypto transactions to and from crypto exchanges to be tracked, jeopardizing censorship resistance. Remember that this is exactly what Jonathan predicted at the end of his book. Now, the silver lining is that Jonathan also predicted that these new attempts to control Bitcoin and crypto won't succeed. Quote, no doubt history will repeat itself as the establishment fails to appreciate some of the nuances in the incentives, making blunders on the way, providing users with potential tactical advantages to exploit. Put differently, these institutions don't understand that lots of crypto holders are in it for more than the short-term fiat gains. They have the same imagination that Bitcoin's early believers did. They can see what this technology is capable of and how it can set them free from the existing financial system. The difference is it's not just individuals anymore, it's institutions now, and even some governments. It's becoming a lot easier for the decision makers in these organizations to imagine what crypto could become, and every day this imagination is coming closer to becoming actualized into reality. And that, my friends, is how we fight back, by using our imaginations to create an alternative system. As Jonathan notes, quote, the outcome here is far from certain, but if we try hard enough, we may just succeed. And that's all for today's video, folks. So if you learned something new, smash that like button to let us know. If you want to keep learning, subscribe to the channel and ping that notification bell. If you want to help others learn, take a second to share this video with them. And if you're looking for a hardware wallet to store your crypto or an exchange to accumulate said crypto with, check out the Coin Bureau deals page. It's got the biggest discounts on the best hardware wallets and up to $40,000 of airdrops, bonuses, and incentives on the best crypto exchanges. The link will be down in the description. Thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Till then, my name is Guy, and Satoshi be with you.